50 million years ago, North America was almost unrecognizable. Much of the continent was warm, wet, and covered in forests that stretched for thousands of miles. Palm trees grew far beyond the places they could survive today. Crocodiles drifted through rivers in what would one day become Wyoming. Winters, as we know them, had almost disappeared. It was a world that had settled into warmth, and life responded by trying things it had never tried before. The dinosaurs were gone. For millions of years, they had occupied nearly every major role on land, holding mammals in the background. But with that world gone, the survivors inherited an empty continent. Evolution began filling those vacant spaces again, not by recreating what had been lost, but by inventing something entirely different. Some of those experiments looked strangely familiar. Others belonged to branches of life that have no living descendants at all. There were hoofed predators moving silently beneath the trees, giant birds whose place in the food chain is still being debated, tiny horses no larger than a fox, and enormous beasts carrying horns, tusks, and body plans unlike anything walking the earth today. For more than 20 million years, they ruled a continent that no longer exists in the form they knew. Then, little by little, they disappeared. Before we continue our story, if you enjoy these long journeys through prehistoric times, kindly leave us a like and consider subscribing to our channel. And if you're willing to share, let me know in the comments where in the world are you listening tonight and what is the time over there. Let's continue. Every landscape carries a memory of the conditions that shaped it. Before any hoof struck damp ground or any unfamiliar predator crossed a shaded forest floor, the continent itself had already prepared the stage. The creatures of the Eocene did not emerge by chance. They belonged to a span of Earth history unlike any that came before or after, a chapter stretching from approximately 56 million years ago to 33.9 million years ago. Lasting more than 22 million years, it became the longest epoch of the Cenozoic era. Its name came from the Greek word meaning dawn, a fitting title for the rise of modern mammal groups, even though many of those pioneers would eventually leave no living heirs. The beginning of that dawn rested on an unexpected inheritance. After the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction removed the non-avian dinosaurs around 66 million years ago, mammals inherited a world that had long denied them opportunity. For roughly 150 million years, they had remained small, rarely exceeding 10 kilograms, which is about 22 pounds. Most lived unnoticed beneath larger neighbors, active during darkness, and adapted for survival instead of dominance. Once those ancient rulers disappeared, every vacant role across the landscape became available. Evolution answered with extraordinary speed, producing forms that explored every possible way of becoming a mammal. Some climbed, some sprinted, some browsed towering vegetation, and others learned to hunt with astonishing efficiency. The result resembled a workshop filled with bold experiments unfolding all at once. The continent itself encouraged that flourishing diversity. North America still shared a northern connection with Europe through Greenland, allowing animals to move between the land masses across high latitude routes. Similar species appeared on both continents because their ancestors could still travel between them. South America remained isolated, separated by broad seas that prevented such exchanges. Across the western interior, the Rocky Mountains continued their gradual rise, creating immense basins where rivers pooled into expansive lakes. These freshwater systems nourished forests, stretching across valleys and lowlands, while farther east, a warm, shallow sea covered much of the coastal plain extending from what is now New Jersey toward Texas. Shorelines shifted over immense spans of time, reshaping habitats with patient persistence. Perhaps the greatest surprise of the Eocene lies in the meaning of its unfamiliar animals. Many belong to entire mammalian orders that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. They were neither unfinished ancestors nor imperfect attempts at familiar creatures. Each lineage possessed its own anatomy, behavior, and ecological success, refined across millions of years through natural selection. Their disappearance does not diminish how completely they mastered the world around them. Evolution followed those paths for ages before turning elsewhere, leaving only fossils as testimony that such remarkable designs once flourished. Seen together, these four foundations transform the Eocene from a distant interval on the geological calendar into a living world with its own rules. Time supplied opportunity, extinction cleared the way, geography opened corridors, and evolution answered with astonishing originality. Every remarkable beast that wandered those forests belonged to this rare convergence, a moment when possibility seemed almost limitless, and the living world explored directions it would never follow again. Earth crossed into the Eocene through a climatic upheaval of extraordinary scale. Geologists call it the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a turning point that unfolded across a geological instant while reshaping oceans, continents, and the future of mammal life. Within a span estimated at only about 20,000 years, between 3,000 and 7,000 gigatons of carbon entered the atmosphere and oceans. On the timescale of Earth's history, that interval was scarcely more than a heartbeat. Global temperatures climbed by roughly 5 to 8 degrees Celsius, or 41 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit, above conditions that were already much warmer than those of the present day. The oceans responded almost immediately. As increasing amounts of carbon dissolved into seawater, acidity rose across great depths, disrupting organisms that formed the foundation of marine ecosystems. Between 30 and 50% of deep sea foraminifera disappeared from the fossil record during this interval. These microscopic organisms supported countless larger forms of life, so their decline echoed through the food web. It became one of the largest marine extinction events of the entire Cenozoic era, driven by changes in the chemistry of the planet itself. Scientists continue examining the origin of that immense carbon release. One possibility points toward volcanic activity associated with the opening of the North Atlantic, where rising magma heated organic rich sediments until enormous quantities of carbon escaped. Another explanation focuses on methane trapped beneath the seafloor, released as warming oceans destabilized frozen deposits. Many researchers consider a combination of these processes the most likely path. Each addition of carbon increased temperatures further, encouraging even more carbon to escape into the atmosphere, creating a cycle that fed upon its own momentum. Across the northern continents, warmer conditions transformed geography into a network of living pathways. Regions once limited by colder climates became suitable for mammals adapted to subtropical forests. Populations dispersed between North America, Europe, and Asia with unusual speed, carrying unfamiliar lineages into landscapes they had never occupied before. The fossil record captures this movement with remarkable clarity. Early horses, the first true primates, and the earliest members of the modern carnivorous mammal branch appear almost simultaneously in North America, suggesting migration across newly welcoming routes instead of prolonged local evolution. One deposit in Wyoming preserves an especially intimate record of adaptation. Fossils recovered from Polecat Bench reveal that early horse populations became noticeably smaller during the peak of the warming event. Their bodies shrank by as much as 30% across only a few thousand generations. Smaller mammals shed heat more effectively and required less food when vegetation became less nutritious under elevated carbon dioxide levels. The rocks preserve an example of evolution unfolding within a measurable interval, demonstrating that living populations could respond to environmental change with surprising speed. The warming endured for approximately 200,000 years before Earth's climate gradually settled toward the broader conditions that would define the Eocene. Although temperatures eased, the communities assembled during that remarkable interval remained. New arrivals established themselves beside long standing residents, and their descendants filled forests, floodplains, lakeshores, and coastlines across a continent prepared by climate to welcome possibilities that had rarely existed before. Long before familiar carnivores shaped the balance of North American ecosystems, another lineage held every major hunting role across the continent. Their bones belong to animals with no living descendants, and their family tree ends completely within the fossil record. For nearly 20 million years, these mammals stood at the summit of predation. Paleontologists know them collectively as the creodonts, a name describing an ecological dynasty whose influence stretched across much of the northern hemisphere. The group included two principal families, the Oxyinidae and the Hyanodontidae. Modern classification no longer treats them as a single, natural branch of mammalian evolution, yet their shared place within Eocene ecosystems remains unmistakable. Across forests, river corridors, lake shores, and more open country, these hunters occupied nearly every predatory niche available. Their success lasted through countless generations, establishing a long period during which no member of the modern carnivorous mammal order challenged their dominance. One feature distinguished them from every living cat, dog, bear, weasel, and seal. Modern carnivorous mammals rely on one specialized pair of slicing teeth, called carnassials, positioned toward the front of the cheek teeth. Creodonts carried several carnassial pairs farther back along the jaw. This arrangement allowed effective processing of flesh, although the mechanics were somewhat less efficient than the design later perfected by their successors. Even so, their jaws proved fully capable of sustaining millions of years of evolutionary success across remarkably diverse habitats. Their variety was extraordinary. Some species weighed only a few kilograms, which is about 7 to 11 pounds, filling the role of adaptable, opportunistic hunters. Others approached the size of modern lions and became dominant predators wherever they lived. Certain forms favored dense woodland, where short bursts of speed served well among tangled vegetation. Others ranged across broader floodplains or searched river margins for weakened prey and carrion. A few even retained climbing abilities, allowing them to exploit food sources beyond the reach of larger competitors. Together, they formed an intricate community whose members rarely depended upon identical resources. Among the earliest and most widespread was Archaea. Fossils from the Wasachian land mammal age appear across numerous North American sites, revealing an animal that flourished through adaptability instead of overwhelming size. It likely resembled the ecological role occupied today by medium-sized, omnivorous, and carnivorous mammals, taking advantage of many food sources as circumstances changed. The abundance of its remains suggests that Archaea became one of the defining predators of the early Eocene landscape. The oxyanids established themselves first, emerging during the late Paleocene, soon after the disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs. Their broad skulls and powerful jaws emphasized crushing force as much as slicing ability, making them effective consumers of flesh and bone alike. Later came the hyanodontids, a lineage that expanded across North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. Their skulls became longer, their teeth increasingly specialized for meat, and several species reached the size of the largest modern terrestrial predators. Measured against human history, their reign lasted far longer than the entire existence of the genus Homo. Generation after generation, creodonts remained the defining hunters of their world, perfectly suited to landscapes that favored their remarkable design. Their story became inseparable from the Eocene itself, enduring until the climate gradually shifted and the conditions supporting that long established dynasty began to fade. Few fossils have misled paleontologists as thoroughly as Patriofelis. At first glance, nearly every feature seemed familiar. The proportions of the skull, the shape of the jaws, and the broad outline of the head all suggested an early member of the cat family. Early researchers believed they had uncovered the distant ancestor of modern felines, preserving that conclusion in the animal's name, which means father of cats. The title survived long after the interpretation itself faded, leaving behind a reminder that appearances can guide science toward convincing, yet incorrect, conclusions. Patriofelis belonged to the oxyenid branch of the creodonts, a lineage that vanished completely before the Eocene reached its end. Its resemblance to a cat reflected one of evolution's recurring patterns, known as convergent evolution. Separate branches of life sometimes encounter similar ecological challenges and arrive at strikingly similar body plans, despite sharing no close ancestry. Patriofelis and modern cats reached comparable designs through independent evolutionary journeys separated by millions of years of history. Their similarities emerged from function instead of shared descent. Adult individuals probably weighed between 30 and 100 kilograms, which is about 66 to 220 pounds. That range placed the largest specimens alongside living cougars in overall size, making Patriofelis the greatest oxyenid predator known from North America. Its body, however, differed in important ways. The legs remained proportionally shorter than those of modern cats, and its feet rested flatter against the ground instead of balancing high upon the toes. Those features traded sprinting speed for strength and stability, creating an ambush hunter built to overpower prey through sudden force delivered across short distances. Plant fossils help reconstruct the world where this hunter flourished. The Clarno Formation of Oregon preserves trunks, ferns, horsetails, and other vegetation indicating humid forests that remained productive throughout the year. Dense layers of leaves filtered much of the sunlight before it reached the forest floor. Fallen logs, tangled plants, and heavy undergrowth offered abundant cover, allowing an animal with patience and powerful muscles to remain concealed until the final instant before striking. Evidence from the Bridger Formation broadens that picture. Within those deposits, Patriofelis appears alongside early relatives of rhinoceroses and tapirs, several horse species, and the remarkable giant herbivore Uintatherium. Medium-sized browsing mammals likely formed much of its preferred prey. Instead of pursuing animals across long distances, it probably relied upon careful positioning, launching from cover with enough momentum to overwhelm prey before escape became possible. Every feature of its body supported that method, from its compact limbs to its crushing bite. The story of the oxyanids continued to evolve even after Patriofelis reached its peak. Among their later representatives was a branch known as the Macaroidinae, whose members developed elongated upper canine teeth, resembling the famous saber-toothed predators of a much later age. These impressive weapons appeared tens of millions of years before the Ice Age cats that would become celebrated in museums and artwork. Evolution discovered the saber-toothed design once, carried it through countless generations, then allowed the entire lineage to disappear. Ages afterward, another branch of mammals arrived independently at nearly the same solution, leaving the fossil record with two separate inventions connected only by shared purpose. Among the many hunters moving through Eocene North America, one lineage still seems to resist expectation. Their tracks ended in rounded hooves instead of claws, yet their lives revolved around pursuing flesh. Mesonychids occupied a place that feels unfamiliar even today, combining the body framework of hoofed mammals with the habits of active carnivores. They remind us that the early age of mammals explored combinations that later ages would abandon completely. Each foot ended in compact hooves resembling those of deer, horses, or cattle. Nothing about those feet suggested the image of a predator wading along a riverbank or following prey across open ground. Nevertheless, their skulls and teeth told another story. Strong jaws carried blade-shaped teeth capable of slicing meat efficiently, while robust neck muscles supplied powerful bites. The contradiction existed only from a modern perspective. During the Eocene, hoofed carnivores formed a successful branch of mammalian evolution that persisted across millions of years. Their place on the evolutionary tree deepens the mystery. Mesonychids occupied a position near the ancestry of the mammals that eventually returned to the sea and became whales. The connection remains an active area of scientific study, with new analyses continuing to refine those relationships. Even so, the broader pattern remains striking. One branch continued developing as terrestrial predators, while another gradually transformed into fully aquatic mammals. The distant ancestry, shared by hoofed hunters and modern dolphins, illustrates how dramatically evolution can reshape the same foundational body plan. The best known North American representative is Mesonyx. Comparable in size to a modern wolf or large coyote, it carried an elongated skull lined with effective cutting teeth despite lacking grasping forelimbs. Evidence suggests that Mesonyx hunted and scavenged across floodplains, where longer pursuits became more practical than sudden attacks from dense vegetation. This strategy contrasted with the concealed approach favored by Patriofelis. Both predators shared the same continent while exploiting different opportunities, reducing direct competition between them and allowing separate hunting styles to flourish side by side. Larger members of the lineage appeared as well. Harpagolestes reached the size of a modern bear and inhabited parts of both North America and Asia during the Middle Eocene. Its distribution reflects continued animal movement across northern land connections linking the continents. Fossils from these distant regions reveal that Mesonychids were adaptable travelers, capable of occupying a wide variety of environments as climates permitted migration. Without claws capable of gripping prey securely, Mesonychids probably relied upon a different sequence during the hunt. They may have run alongside fleeing animals, using body weight to unbalance them before delivering repeated bites with their powerful jaws. Strength, endurance, and momentum became more valuable than specialized forelimbs. Such behavior would have favored prey suited to pursuit across relatively open terrain, matching the environments where many Mesonychid fossils are recovered. The lineage endured through much of the Eocene before fading from North America approximately 37 to 38 million years ago. Their disappearance coincided with broader ecological changes already reshaping the continent. Mesonyx vanished alongside many remarkable mammals whose histories had become inseparable from the warm landscapes that first allowed them to flourish, leaving hoofed predators as another completed chapter within the long experiment of Eocene evolution. Nothing wandering the forests of Eocene North America could rival the appearance of Uintatherium. Even among an age filled with unfamiliar mammals, its outlines stood apart. Massive shoulders carried a broad head crowned with paired, bony projections, while curved tusks extended beneath its upper jaw. Every feature suggested an animal assembled from ideas that evolution would never combine again, belonging to a lineage whose nearest living relative remains uncertain despite generations of study. An adult measured between 3 and 4.5 meters in body length, which is about 10 to nearly 15 feet, and stood as much as 2.2 meters at the shoulder, which is about 7 feet. Body mass ranged from roughly 900 to 2,000 kilograms, placing the largest individuals alongside modern white rhinoceroses in overall bulk. Thick column-shaped limbs supported a deep chest and heavy frame, suited for carrying immense weight through forested landscapes. Across the skull rose three matching pairs of rounded bony knobs, increasing in size toward the rear. Mature males also carried enlarged upper canine teeth that curved downward into formidable tusks. Uintatherium belonged to an entirely extinct mammalian order known as Dinosaurata, meaning terrible horned ones. Every member of that order vanished long ago, leaving no living descendants to clarify its ancestry. Some anatomical studies place Dinoceratans near hoofed mammals, while others suggest they diverged along an isolated branch early in mammalian history. Modern analytical techniques continue refining these relationships, yet the exact position of Dinosaurata remains unresolved. Their disappearance erased an entire evolutionary experiment, preserving only scattered bones and the questions surrounding them. The structures decorating the skull differed from the horns of rhinoceroses or the ossicones carried by giraffes. They formed as direct extensions of the skull itself, solid bone rather than coverings of hardened protein. Individual variation suggests these projections played important roles in display and recognition, while larger males probably relied upon them during contests with rivals. Their downward curving tusks added another formidable feature, creating a combination of pushing, striking, and threatening equipment unlike that of any living herbivore. Competition within the species shaped these elaborate structures across countless generations before the lineage reached its conclusion. The scientific history of Uintatherium became nearly as dramatic as the animal itself. Fossils recovered from Wyoming during the 1870s appeared just as American paleontology entered one of its most famous rivalries. Othniel Charles Marsh and Edward Drinker Cope each described similar discoveries under different scientific names, including Loxolophodon, Tenoceras, Dinoceras, and Uintatherium. Competing interpretations fueled years of disagreement as both researchers rushed to publish new material before the other. Only much later did careful revision untangle this confusing collection of names, establishing Uintatherium as the accepted designation for the best-known members of the group. The lineage disappeared from the fossil record approximately 37 to 39 million years ago, near the close of the Eocene. Dinosaurata vanished with it, leaving no surviving branch to continue its remarkable history. Entire mammalian orders occasionally emerge, flourish across millions of years, and then conclude without descendants. Uintatherium stands as one of the clearest reminders that success in one chapter of Earth's history offers no promise of permanence in the next, even for creatures that once seemed firmly established across their world. Among all the mammals that emerged after the disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs, few reveal the possibilities of evolution more dramatically than the brontotheres. Their history unfolded across only a small fraction of geological time, yet within that span, they transformed from modest browsing animals into some of the largest land mammals their world had ever supported. The same evolutionary path that carried them upward also narrowed the range of futures available to them until extraordinary success became an unexpected burden. Their story begins with Eotitanops, a species that lived approximately 53 to 51 million years ago. It stood little larger than a modern dog and blended easily among other early odd-toed hoofed mammals. Nothing in its proportions hinted at the immense descendants that would follow. Its legs, skull, and teeth reflected the life of a small forest browser feeding among soft vegetation beneath dense tree cover. Had its fossils been found alone, few would have predicted that this ordinary animal represented the opening chapter of one of the fastest increases in body size ever documented among mammals. The group later received the name Brontotherium, meaning thunder beast. Othniel Charles Marsh chose the title after learning of traditions preserved by the Sioux Nation, whose people had encountered enormous fossil bones weathering from the Badlands long before professional paleontologists arrived. They spoke of thunder horses whose remains rested within the earth after crossing the sky during powerful storms. Those stories recognized the exceptional nature of the fossils generations before scientific classification provided formal language to describe them. Across roughly 16 million years, the lineage expanded at an astonishing pace. The last famous representative, Megacerops, reached about 2.5 meters at the shoulder, which is about 8 feet, and measured as much as 5 meters in length, which is about 16 feet. Adults weighed between 3,000 and 5,000 kilograms, matching the size of the largest living elephants. Distinctive paired horns rose from the end of the nose, dividing into broad forked shapes, unlike the horns of any living mammal. A study published during 2023 identified this sustained increase as the fastest confirmed body size escalation yet documented in mammalian evolutionary history. Evidence suggests this remarkable transformation emerged through persistent natural selection, favoring larger individuals. Smaller brontosaurs disappeared from the fossil record more frequently than their heavier relatives. Greater size offered increased protection from predators while allowing access to larger quantities of vegetation. Each generation shifted slightly upward until the cumulative effect reshaped the entire lineage. Evolution did not leap directly toward giants. It advanced through countless modest changes, each one preserved because it improved survival under the ecological conditions of the Eocene. Fossil deposits containing multiple Megacerops individuals provide another glimpse into their lives. Entire groups appear to have died together, indicating that these immense herbivores probably traveled in herds rather than alone. Their horns differed noticeably between individuals, a pattern consistent with contests among males competing for social rank or breeding opportunities. Differences preserved in bone suggest repeated encounters that rarely required lethal force, yet steadily influenced which animals passed their traits into future generations. Their teeth finally revealed the limitation hidden within their triumph. Broad rectangular molars excelled at grinding tender leaves from warm forests rich in moisture. As climates cooled and vegetation became tougher and more fibrous, those specialized teeth struggled to process the changing plants. The anatomy that had supported millions of years of prosperity could not adjust rapidly enough. The forests diminished, the giants followed, and one of evolution's most spectacular experiments concluded with the fading of the landscape that had shaped it. A towering figure often appeared where forest paths widened near broad lakes and winding rivers. From a distance, it seemed to embody every expectation of a formidable hunter. Its height rivaled that of many browsing mammals. Its head rested upon a powerful neck, and its enormous beak suggested a weapon capable of ending almost any struggle. For more than a century, that appearance shaped one of the most enduring misconceptions in paleontology until accumulating evidence gradually revealed an entirely different animal. Known today as Gastornis, and once described in North America under the separate name Diatryma, this remarkable bird entered scientific literature after fossils recovered from Wyoming during the 1870s. Only later did researchers recognize that the North American and European discoveries belonged to the same genus. Standing approximately 2.15 meters tall, which is about 7 feet, and weighing between 170 and 225 kilograms, Gastornis carried a skull measuring about 45 centimeters in length, which is about 18 feet. Paleontologists frequently compared its broad beak to the shape of a hatchet, an image that reinforced its fearsome reputation. Its ancestry proved even more surprising than its appearance, although museum displays often placed it beside the famous terror birds of South America. Evolutionary relationships told another story entirely. Gastornis belonged to the order that also includes ducks, geese, and swans. Beneath its imposing frame rested the heritage of waterfowl, making it a distant relative of the familiar mallard instead of any eagle or hawk. Evolution had produced a giant flightless bird from an unexpected branch of the avian family tree, demonstrating once again that outward form and ancestry often follow separate paths. For nearly 150 years, researchers imagined Gastornis as the dominant predator of the early Eocene. Its broad skull offered ample attachment for powerful jaw muscles, while its height exceeded that of nearly every mammal sharing its habitat. Small horses, early primates, and other woodland animals seemed likely victims. The image fit comfortably within a narrative where birds briefly inherited the ruling position left vacant after the disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs, delaying the rise of mammalian hunters. That interpretation began to weaken when fossil footprints discovered near Bellingham, Washington, within rocks dating to approximately 53.7 million years ago, revealed feet unlike those of any known predatory bird. The toes ended bluntly, without the curved talons expected in an animal adapted for gripping struggling prey. Raptors depend upon sharply hooked claws to seize and restrain victims. Gastornis walked upon feet built for steady movement across the forest floor instead of violent capture. Its beak added another layer to the growing revision. Powerful though it certainly was, the tip lacked the downward hook seen in flesh-eating birds. The broad edges appeared better suited to cracking resistant seeds, crushing hard fruits, and processing durable plant material. Stable carbon isotope analysis published during 2013 strengthened that conclusion. Chemical signatures preserved within fossil bone matched the dietary pattern of a herbivore rather than a carnivore, indicating that plants formed the foundation of its nutrition. The consequences reached beyond the bird itself. Once Gastornis stepped away from the role of apex predator, that ecological position belonged entirely to the creodonts already roaming the forests. The giant bird remained one of the landscape's most imposing inhabitants, yet its immense beak likely opened seeds instead of flesh. Nearby, early horses, no larger than modern foxes, browsed among the same vegetation, sharing woodland clearings with a towering relative of ducks, whose greatest strength served the harvest of the forest rather than the hunt. Change sometimes arrives without fanfare, carried across forgotten land bridges by travelers that seem almost assembled from mismatched ideas. During the later Eocene, one such arrival entered North America from Asia and settled into forests. floodplains, and open woodlands. It possessed neither the graceful outline of earlier hunters nor the imposing horns of the great herbivores. Instead, it carried a massive head upon long legs and confronted the world with a strategy built upon endurance, crushing force, and relentless confidence. These animals were the entelodonts, remembered today by the dramatic nickname hell pigs, although they were not pigs at all. Their closest living relatives belong among hippopotamuses and whales, descendants of an ancient, even toed hoofed lineage whose branches followed astonishingly different destinies. Earlier, another nearby branch had produced the mesonychids before one portion eventually entered the oceans and became dolphins and whales. The Eocene repeatedly blurred familiar categories, reminding us that the paths leading toward grazers, hunters, and marine mammals often began from neighboring roots deep within mammalian history. Among the earliest major North American representatives stood Archaeotherium. It weighed several hundred kilograms, carried a skull approaching 1 meter in length, which is about 3 feet, and bore thick bony flanges projecting from both the cheekbones and lower jaw. These structures probably protected the face during violent encounters with rivals. Its brain remained surprisingly small, roughly comparable in volume to an orange despite the size of the body surrounding it. Long, slender limbs allowed movement far quicker than such a heavy frame might suggest, giving the animal an unexpected ability to pursue opportunities across broad landscapes. Evidence preserved near Douglas, Wyoming, offers one of the most intriguing glimpses into its behavior. Fossils from a remarkable bone accumulation include remains of several different species marked by entelodont teeth. Many researchers interpret the site as a place where carcasses were gathered and revisited over time. Bite marks found upon bones belonging to Hyenodon indicate encounters with one of the era's specialized carnivores. Whether those remains came through hunting, scavenging, or violent competition, the evidence suggests entelodonts regularly contested valuable food resources and often succeeded in claiming them. Their method of attack differed from nearly every familiar predator alive today. They lacked grasping forelimbs capable of restraining struggling prey, and they did not depend upon the explosive acceleration associated with modern cats. Instead, paleontologists reconstruct a sequence built around momentum. Charging alongside another animal, an entelodont could collide with tremendous force, upsetting balance through sheer weight before bringing its enormous jaws into action. Thick bones and reinforced facial structures made such confrontations sustainable, allowing persistence where greater agility was unnecessary. The contrast between body and brain has attracted scientific attention for decades. Relative to overall size, the brain remained modest, implying behavior guided primarily through instinct and deeply established patterns instead of flexible reasoning. Success came through physical resilience, powerful jaws, and an ability to dominate direct confrontations. During much of the Eocene, those qualities proved sufficient for survival across changing ecosystems. When colder conditions eventually transformed the continent, many celebrated lineages disappeared forever. The horned giants faded away, the brontotheres vanished, the Creodont dynasty came to its end. Entelodonts endured beyond that turning point, surviving into the early Miocene before finally disappearing approximately 16 million years ago. Their persistence revealed that the coming world favored adaptability expressed through broad diets and durable bodies, allowing these formidable mammals to outlive many of the extraordinary creatures that had once defined the Eocene landscape. Amid towering tree ferns, broad-leafed shrubs, and tangled vines, one of the least conspicuous mammals of the Eocene slipped between patches of filtered sunlight. It attracted little notice beside the massive herbivores, towering birds, and powerful hunters already sharing the landscape. Even so, this modest browser carried a future extending farther than any giant surrounding it. Within its slight frame rested the beginning of a lineage that would eventually circle nearly every continent alongside human civilization. Hyracotherium stood only about 25 to 50 centimeters at the shoulder, which is about 10 to 20 inches, and weighed between 2 and 5 kilograms. Its front feet carried 4 toes, while the hind feet bore 3. A flexible spine allowed swift movement through dense vegetation, where turning quickly around trunks and fallen branches mattered more than sustained speed. Its teeth were adapted for browsing tender leaves, shoots, and fresh growth within warm forests. Nothing about its appearance suggested the elegant running horses familiar today. It resembled a small woodland mammal whose greatest strength lay in remaining unnoticed. Its scientific story proved almost as winding as its evolutionary one. Fossils discovered in England during the 1840s were first described as belonging to a small mammal with uncertain relationships. Later, North American discoveries received the separate name Eohippus, meaning dawn horse, after paleontologists recognized similarities to later horses. Continued study eventually demonstrated that the European and North American fossils represented the same genus. Under the rules governing scientific naming, Hyracotherium retained priority, while Eohippus gradually disappeared from formal classification, even though the older popular name continues to appear in books and museums. Behind that taxonomic revision stood a remarkable reality. Hyracotherium represents the earliest known member of the horse lineage. Every living horse, zebra, donkey, and Przewalski's wild horse, traces its ancestry through this small Eocene browser. Across roughly 50 million years, paleontologists have reconstructed one of the clearest evolutionary sequences known, following gradual changes through dozens of intermediate species preserved within successive rock layers. Few mammalian histories are documented with comparable continuity. Current evidence also suggests that Hyracotherium did not first appear in North America. The lineage most likely originated in Europe or Asia before expanding across high-latitude land connections opened during the extraordinary warmth surrounding the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Those newly accessible routes allowed mammals to move between continents with unusual freedom. Having entered North America, Hyracotherium encountered ecological opportunities that encouraged further diversification, establishing populations that would shape the later history of horses. Its bones preserve another chapter written directly by climate. Fossils recovered from Polecat Bench in Wyoming reveal that early horse populations became as much as 30% smaller during the intense warming of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. Reduced body size likely improved heat regulation while lowering nutritional demands as vegetation changed. Few examples within the fossil record demonstrate evolutionary adjustment to environmental pressure with such measurable clarity. The changing climate left its signature not only within sediments, but also within the bodies of these early horses themselves. Hyracotherium never stood alone within its family for long. Relatives including Orohippus and Epihippus appeared across the Eocene, each introducing modest refinements in teeth, limbs, and overall proportions. Their forests contained no sweeping grasslands, yet natural selection gradually favored dental complexity that would later prove valuable after new environments emerged. Generation followed generation without intention or foresight, each carrying small inherited differences into another season of leaves. From that patient succession arose a lineage whose future stretched far beyond the warm jungles where its earliest footsteps disappeared into soft forest soil. A traveler wandering through an Eocene forest in North America would have encountered a sight that seems impossible from a modern perspective. Small primates climbed through the canopy, leaped between branches, and searched clusters of fruit above streams and wetlands. Their descendants would leave no lasting presence on the continent. The forests that once supported them would disappear, and with them, an entire chapter of North American natural history that survives today only in stone. For nearly 20 million years, primates flourished across these warm forests. North America was home to no monkeys or apes in the modern sense, yet it supported several successful early branches whose lives unfolded high above the forest floor. Among the most widespread were the adapiforms, represented by genera including Notharctus, Smilodectes, and Cantius. Their bodies resembled those of living lemurs, with grasping hands capable of wrapping securely around branches, forward-facing eyes, providing precise depth, perception, and long balancing tails that stabilized movement through tangled vegetation. Fossils recovered from Wyoming's Bridger Formation preserve nearly complete skeletons of Notharctus, making it one of the clearest windows into early primate anatomy. Notharctus itself weighed only about 1 to 2 kilograms. Its teeth reveal a diet centered upon fruit, tender leaves, and other soft plant material readily available throughout the year. Limb proportions show an animal adapted for climbing and careful movement within dense woodland canopies rather than rapid travel across open ground. Every major feature of its skeleton identifies it as a true primate, living comfortably in an environment that offered abundant food and complex three-dimensional pathways through the trees. Sharing those forests was another distinctive lineage known as the Omomyids. These primates differed noticeably from the adapiforms. Their skulls contained exceptionally large eye sockets, suggesting adaptation to activity after sunset, when enlarged eyes gathered every available trace of light. Elongated hind limbs indicate remarkable leaping ability, allowing swift movement from branch to branch. Among the larger members of this group was Macrotarsius, whose fossils have also been recovered from Middle Eocene deposits in North America. Together, these two primate lineages occupied complementary ways of life within the same richly layered forest. Conditions during the Eocene strongly favored such animals. Extensive subtropical forests stretched across broad regions without the severe seasonal interruptions familiar in cooler climates today. Fruit, leaves, flowers, and insects remained available through much of the year. Continuous tree cover reduced exposure while creating interconnected routes through the canopy. For climbing mammals dependent upon stable food supplies and elevated habitats, few environments could have offered greater opportunity. That favorable balance gradually weakened as global cooling progressed. Forests became increasingly fragmented, separating once continuous habitats into isolated patches. Populations that had moved freely through uninterrupted canopies faced widening gaps and shrinking food resources. Fossil evidence records a steady decline in North American primate diversity during the later Eocene. By the beginning of the Oligocene, these native primates had vanished entirely from the continent. Their disappearance remains one of paleontology's enduring puzzles. Primates survived comparable environmental change in Africa and South America, eventually giving rise to the diverse lineages alive today. North America followed a different path. Researchers continue examining several contributing factors, including competition from rapidly diversifying rodents, changing forest structure, and the timing of cooling across northern latitudes. No single explanation fully accounts for the loss. Millions of years later, primates would return to North America by an entirely different route, carried not by ancient migration corridors through warm forests, but by a species capable of reshaping every landscape it entered. Along the warm margin, where forests yielded to shallow seas, the boundary between land and ocean had begun to lose its certainty. Mammals arrived at the shoreline carrying bodies shaped by life on solid ground, yet generation after generation they ventured farther into coastal waters. Their skeletons preserve that transformation with remarkable clarity, recording a chapter of evolution still unfolding instead of one already complete. During the Eocene, much of the coastal plain extending from what is now New Jersey through Texas lay beneath a broad tropical sea. Warm currents crossed carbonate platforms crowded with shellfish, corals, fishes, and marine plants. River systems carried nutrients from the continent into sheltered bays, creating productive shallows where terrestrial mammals encountered opportunities unavailable inland. This coastline became one of Earth's great evolutionary workshops, where familiar bodies gradually adopted unfamiliar lives. Among the earliest pioneers were the first relatives of modern sea cows. They still possessed four functional legs capable of supporting them on land, yet much of their time was spent wading through shallow coastal waters. Their broad mouths cropped sea grasses rooted in the seafloor, while dense bones helped counter buoyancy, allowing stable movement beneath the surface. They lacked the streamlined form of living manatees and dugongs. Every limb, joint, and vertebra revealed an animal balanced between two worlds, preserving the intermediate stages of an extraordinary transition from browsing on land to feeding almost entirely beneath the sea. Nearby, another lineage was changing even more dramatically. The primitive whales, known as archaeocetes, had already committed themselves to marine life, although traces of their ancestry remained unmistakable. Tiny hind limbs projected from bodies otherwise adapted for swimming. These reduced legs could no longer support weight on land, yet they endured as inherited structures, reminders of terrestrial ancestors that had walked only about 15 million years earlier. Evolution had reshaped almost every part of the body, while leaving small fragments of its earlier design behind. Among these early whales, Basilosaurus became the undisputed ruler of the coastal waters. Reaching approximately 17 to 20 meters in length, which is about 56 to 66 feet, its elongated body moved through warm seas with commanding efficiency. Massive jaws carried rows of sharp teeth suited for capturing large prey, including fishes and smaller whales. The ocean's supreme hunter descended from hoofed mammals whose distant relatives once crossed floodplains and riverbanks. Within a comparatively brief span of geological time, a land mammal had become one of the largest predators on the planet. Evidence for the warmth supporting this transformation appears far from the coastline itself. Crocodile fossils recovered from Wyoming's Green River Formation demonstrate that climates remained free from prolonged winter freezing even deep within the continent. Living crocodilians cannot survive sustained hard frost, making their inland distribution one of the clearest biological indicators of Eocene temperatures. Their presence defines the reach of frost-free conditions with remarkable precision, confirming that warm environments extended across regions now known for severe seasonal cold. Land and sea therefore evolved in parallel, each producing new experiments shaped by the same favorable climate. Creodonts governed the forests, while Basilosaurus mastered the surrounding waters. Between them stretched estuaries and coastal lagoons where mammals repeatedly tested unfamiliar ways of living. Some paused partway through the journey, others completed it, and their bones preserve one of evolution's rarest gifts, a transformation captured while it was still unfolding, before the final destination had fully taken shape. Some landscapes preserve scattered fragments of vanished worlds. One remarkable place preserves an entire living community with astonishing fidelity, allowing individual moments from the Eocene to remain visible across immense spans of time. When paleontologists seek the clearest window into this forgotten continent, their attention returns again and again to the Green River Formation, where ancient lakes transformed ordinary days into one of Earth's greatest natural archives. The Green River Formation records the history of Lake Goshoot, Lake Uinta, and Fossil Lake, three immense inland basins that occupied parts of what are now southwestern Wyoming, eastern Utah, and northwestern Colorado. Across approximately 5 million years, beginning around 53.5 million years ago, and continuing until about 48.5 million years ago, these lakes accumulated countless thin layers of carbonate-rich sediment. The record is so continuous and the preservation so extraordinary that geologists classify the formation as a Lagerstätte, a rare category reserved for fossil sites capable of preserving details that almost always disappear before burial. Its remarkable preservation depended upon the chemistry of the deepest waters. The lake bottoms contained almost no dissolved oxygen, preventing most decomposing bacteria from surviving after plants and animals settled onto the sediment. Fine carbonate mud then covered each specimen before scavengers or decay could destroy it. Layer after layer, accumulated across thousands of generations, preserving scales attached to fishes, impressions of feathers, delicate fin rays, insect wings with complete vein patterns, outlines of soft tissues, and even microscopic structures within plants. Instead of isolated skeletons, entire organisms often remained nearly intact, preserving a level of biological detail rarely matched anywhere in the fossil record. The surrounding landscape became part of the same geological memory. Crocodile skeletons discovered within Wyoming demonstrate that prolonged freezing conditions rarely reached this region during the Eocene. Modern crocodilians cannot survive sustained winter frost, making their fossil distribution one of the strongest biological indicators of the period's warmth. Palm fronds appear beside sycamore and maple leaves, while fossils of boa constrictors reinforce the picture of a climate that remained suitable for tropical and subtropical species. Every fossil contributes another direct observation, allowing the rocks themselves to describe the environment that produced them. Among the most celebrated discoveries lies a remarkably productive horizon within Fossil Lake, known as the 18-inch layer, measuring about 46 centimeters, which is about 18 inches. This single bed preserves thousands of complete fish skeletons deposited during one mass mortality event. Nidea and Diplomistus dominate the assemblage, many retaining complete fins, scales, and delicate bones that normally separate before burial. For well over a century, these fossils have been collected, studied, and displayed throughout the world, making Green River fishes among the most familiar fossils ever recovered from North America. The formation preserves far more than aquatic life alone. Early bats, among the oldest confirmed from North America, appear with fully developed wings, suited for agile flight. Birds representing shorelines and shallow wetlands rest beside insects whose wing venation remains sharply defined. Some specimens preserve traces of original body pigmentation, while fossil leaves still display feeding scars created by insects before the plants fell into the lakes. Predators, herbivores, parasites, flowering plants, and freshwater organisms appear together within the same sequence, preserving an ecological community instead of disconnected species. That extraordinary abundance also left a legacy extending beyond paleontology. Vast quantities of organic material settled into these basins year after year, becoming buried beneath younger sediments and gradually transformed into the immense Green River oil shale deposits, among the largest in North America. The energy resources beneath the modern landscape therefore owe part of their origin to flourishing Eocene ecosystems, whose everyday lives became preserved in stone before continuing their journey through deep geological time. No sunrise announced the beginning of the Eocene's decline. Forests still spread across the continent, rivers continued their familiar courses, and the remarkable mammals that had flourished through millions of years carried on with lives shaped by abundance. Even so, around 49 million years ago, Earth began a transformation that unfolded with relentless patience. The climate that had nurtured this extraordinary world was gradually shifting, and the living communities that depended upon its stability had no means of recognizing the change until its effects reached every corner of the landscape. This interval, known as the early Eocene climatic optimum, marked the warmest chapter of the entire epoch. Global average temperatures reached their highest sustained levels, supporting the richest diversity of mammals North America would ever host at one time. Forests extended across enormous distances, allowing countless species to occupy ecological roles that had never existed before and would never exist together again. The continent achieved its fullest biological expression during these millions of years, a remarkable balance produced by warmth that had endured long enough for evolution to explore countless possibilities. Far to the south, however, the foundations of that balance were beginning to shift. Australia continued separating from Antarctica, widening the ocean passage between the continents until water could circulate freely around the southern polar region. That circulation gradually developed into the circumantarctic current, a continuous flow that isolated Antarctica from the warmer Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Indian Ocean. Without steady transport of tropical heat, the southern continent started losing energy that had sustained its mild climate for tens of millions of years. A planetary cooling system had begun operating through geography alone. Changes within the atmosphere strengthened the same direction. Carbon dioxide concentrations declined across the Middle and later Eocene as volcanic activity became less extensive than before. Fresh mountain ranges, including the Alps, the Himalayas, and the Rocky Mountains, exposed vast quantities of silicate rock to rainfall and weathering. Those chemical reactions gradually removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and stored it within minerals. The adjustment unfolded across immense spans of time, yet each generation inherited a climate fractionally cooler than the one preceding it, allowing geology itself to regulate Earth's long-term thermostat. Life experienced another unfamiliar condition as the temperature difference between the equator and the poles steadily increased. Distinct seasons became more pronounced across North America. Trees increasingly responded to shorter days by shedding leaves, plant growth paused during colder intervals, and dependable food supplies began fluctuating throughout the year. Many animals living in this greenhouse world traced their ancestry through countless generations that had never encountered prolonged seasonal scarcity. Evolution had equipped them for constancy, leaving little preparation for repeating cycles of abundance, followed by limitation. Among the earliest signs of ecological strain appeared high within the forest canopy. North America's primates gradually became less diverse during the Middle Eocene, their fossil record revealing fewer species, narrower geographic ranges, and declining populations well before the great extinction events arrived. Their retreat resembled the first fading note within a much larger composition. The forest still stood, many familiar animals remained, and the continent retained much of its former richness. Yet the gradual disappearance of these warm, adapted primates revealed that the great turning had already begun, unfolding with a patience measured in millions of years rather than moments. No boundary marked the moment when the great forest ceased to be whole. The transformation unfolded through countless ordinary seasons, each one differing only slightly from the last. A tree failed to reclaim a northern valley. Another disappeared from a mountain slope. Rain arrived with altered rhythms, and familiar growing places became less dependable. Each change seemed too modest to define an era, yet together they guided the continent away from the greenhouse world that had shaped its remarkable inhabitants for millions of years. The broad, subtropical canopy that once stretched from the Gulf Coast toward the Arctic gradually separated into isolated expanses. Cooling first reached higher latitudes and elevated landscapes, where forests withdrew from territories they had occupied since the opening of the epoch. Open tracts of scrub and dry woodland emerged between surviving stands of taller trees, widening across generations until uninterrupted forest existed only in scattered regions. What had once functioned as one immense ecological community became a chain of shrinking woodland islands divided by landscapes that many forest species struggled to cross. Populations that had once mingled freely found themselves separated by unfamiliar terrain. Large browsing mammals encountered the first severe challenge through their own anatomy. Brontothers, Uintuthers, Coryphodon, and other giant plant eaters possessed broad, low-crowned teeth shaped for crushing tender leaves filled with moisture. As cooling altered rainfall patterns and vegetation gradually shifted toward tougher, drier, more fibrous plants, those feeding structures no longer matched the changing menu before them. They could still browse where suitable forests endured, yet every contraction of those habitats reduced the food they had evolved to process. Evolution had refined those teeth across immense spans of time, but environmental change advanced more rapidly than replacement structures could emerge. Body size deepened the burden. A megacerops weighing several metric tons demanded an immense quantity of food each day merely to maintain its strength. When dependable vegetation became seasonal and increasingly uneven across the landscape, enormous bodies transformed from dependable protection into relentless nutritional expense. Large herbivores exhausted local resources more readily, traveled greater distances in search of forage, and entered periods when daily needs exceeded what deteriorating habitats could consistently provide. The qualities that had once favored survival within abundant forests gradually became liabilities within fragmented ecosystems. Predators shared the consequences through the invisible threads connecting every level of the food web. Creodont hunters, such as Patriofelis, depended upon healthy populations of medium and large browsing mammals, while also relying on dense woodland that concealed their approach. As herbivores declined and forests opened into broken mosaics, prey became less abundant, and traditional hunting grounds lost the cover that had favored these specialized carnivores. Ecological relationships built across millions of years weakened together, each loss amplifying pressures already spreading through neighboring species. The last strongholds of this fading ecosystem persisted across lower latitudes and coastal lowlands, where warmth lingered longer than elsewhere. Fossils preserved within the White River region of present-day South Dakota capture this later chapter, recording communities already diminished from the flourishing continent that had existed before cooling gathered momentum. These landscapes represented a refuge rather than the full expression of the Eocene world, preserving fragments of an ecological masterpiece that had once extended across extraordinary distances. Few of these creatures vanished through a single catastrophic moment. Their disappearance unfolded valley by valley, habitat by habitat, population by population, across millions of years. One forest became two, then several, then many scattered remnants. Familiar voices grew fewer with each passing age, until an entire living world had receded through changes too gradual for any individual animal to recognize while moving through its own brief lifetime. The final chapter of the Brontothers can be read without imagining their footsteps. It survives instead in the shapes of their teeth, the layers of stone that preserve their bones, and the gradual narrowing of the world that once suited them so completely. Few fossil lineages illustrate the balance between success and vulnerability with greater clarity. Their history suggests that extraordinary adaptation can carry within it the first outline of future disappearance, even while a species appears to stand securely at the height of its prosperity. The molars of a brontothere were remarkable structures, broad, rectangular, and low-crowned, perfectly suited for grinding soft leaves gathered from lush subtropical forests. Every ridge and surface reflected millions of years spent feeding upon vegetation rich in moisture and easy to process. Those same teeth became a lasting verdict once forests contracted and tougher plants spread across the landscape. Fibrous stems and coarse foliage demanded different equipment than the brontotheres possessed. Their mouths remained masterpieces of an older environment, while the continent itself continued drifting toward another ecological age. Evolution had produced exceptional precision, yet precision allowed little room for sudden dietary flexibility. Another lineage followed a different path through those same forests. Early horses remained modest in size and changed through countless small anatomical adjustments across successive generations. Among the most significant was the gradual development of taller crowned teeth. At first, the alteration appeared minor, offering little hint of its future importance. Across the following tens of millions of years, however, those changing teeth proved capable of handling increasingly abrasive vegetation as grasslands eventually expanded. While the Brontothers preserved nearly the same browsing equipment throughout the Eocene, horse relatives accumulated subtle modifications that later opened ecological opportunities across nearly every major grassland on Earth. Research published during the year 2023 strengthened this picture by combining fossil evidence with ecological modeling. The investigation confirmed the dramatic increase in brontothere body size through time, while also examining the sequence of their decline. Smaller species disappeared first as environmental change reduced dependable food supplies. Their limited reserves left little margin during prolonged shortages. Larger forms endured somewhat longer because greater bodies stored more energy, yet that advantage dissolved once forests themselves could no longer provide sufficient nourishment. Multi-ton herbivores demanded enormous daily intake, and no amount of stored strength could compensate for the steady disappearance of suitable browse. A successful strategy gradually transformed into an unavoidable burden. The geological record preserves this ending with unusual precision. Within the White River Group, Brontothere fossils continue upward through deposits assigned to the Chadronian interval before stopping at the boundary between the Eocene and Oligocene, approximately 34 million years ago. Above that horizon, despite generations of searching, no confirmed Brontothere bones have appeared. The record resembles the closing page of a lengthy chronicle, marking the conclusion of roughly 20 million years during which these immense browsers shaped forest ecosystems across much of North America. Their disappearance did not require invasion by a stronger rival, nor a devastating epidemic, nor a cosmic impact. The landscape that had molded every feature of their bodies gradually withdrew until those carefully refined adaptations no longer matched daily reality. The Brontothers remained exquisitely suited to a world that was itself fading away. Their fossils preserve more than the memory of impressive animals. They preserve a lasting reminder that survival depends not only upon excellence within one environment, but also upon the capacity to endure when the environment itself becomes something entirely different. A boundary only a few centimeters thick can separate two entirely different worlds. Within certain rock layers, the change arrives with striking clarity. Fossils that filled the preceding pages of Earth's history continue upward until they suddenly do not. Above that narrow horizon, familiar forms have vanished, replaced by communities that belong to another age. Paleontologists gave this turning point a memorable name in Europe, the Grande Coupure, meaning the Great Break, because the fossil record preserves it with unusual sharpness. After millions of years of gradual transformation, the living world crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The final trigger unfolded far to the south. As Antarctica drifted farther from the southern tip of South America, the widening ocean passage eventually became broad enough to sustain uninterrupted circulation around the frozen continent. The circum-Antarctic current established itself as a continuous ring of water, isolating Antarctica from the warmer currents of the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and Indian Ocean. Heat that had reached the southern continent for tens of millions of years could no longer arrive in the same way. Ice expanded across eastern Antarctica during the glaciation known as the Oi-1 event approximately 34 million years ago. Isotopic evidence indicates that this transformation may have unfolded within as little as 400,000 years, an interval remarkably brief on the geological calendar. As ice accumulated across Antarctica, the consequences spread across the planet. Vast quantities of water became locked within expanding glaciers, causing global sea levels to fall. Ocean circulation settled into new patterns shaped by the powerful southern current. The temperature difference between equatorial regions and the poles increased, strengthening climatic contrasts that had remained muted throughout much of the Eocene. Earth no longer resembled the evenly warmed greenhouse that had endured for roughly 22 million years. Cooler conditions became established across continents and oceans alike, reshaping habitats with persistent force. North America preserves this turning point with exceptional clarity. Rocks immediately beneath the boundary contain brontothers, euantothers, numerous primates, abundant creodonts, several horse lineages, and a remarkable diversity of odd-toed browsing mammals. Only a short distance higher, many of those familiar inhabitants have disappeared entirely. The assemblage above the boundary possesses a distinctly different character, reflecting ecosystems reorganized around cooler climates and altered vegetation. The contrast is so pronounced that experienced paleontologists can often recognize the transition while examining an exposed roadside outcrop. Across Europe, the Grande Coupure appears as an equally dramatic biological replacement. Falling sea levels created new land connections with Asia, allowing waves of immigrant mammals to enter territories long occupied by endemic Eocene species. Fossil deposits record the disappearance of many established lineages alongside the arrival of unfamiliar newcomers. The interval is so compressed within geological strata that the exchange appears almost instantaneous, though it emerged from environmental changes accumulating across millions of years. No single catastrophe struck the planet on that boundary. No asteroid darkened the skies, and no brief volcanic winter erased the old ecosystems. The Great Break represented the accumulated consequence of countless modest changes, each nearly imperceptible on its own. Gradual cooling, shifting oceans, shrinking forests, and changing seasons slowly reduced the resilience of the Eocene world until one final threshold was crossed. The rocks preserve that moment with remarkable fidelity, showing how steady transformation can eventually produce an ending that appears, in stone, almost instantaneous. Looking across the boundary after the Great Break, the surviving animals appear at first to have little in common. Some were hoofed herbivores, others omnivores, and still others belonged to lineages that would continue changing for millions of years. Their outward forms differed greatly, yet the fossil record reveals a remarkably consistent pattern beneath that diversity. Survival followed principles rooted in anatomy, metabolism, and flexibility. Once those patterns emerge, the ending of the Eocene becomes less a collection of separate extinctions and more the expression of a single biological rule. The strongest signal concerns specialization. Mammals that occupied the middle range of body size endured far more frequently than the giants that had dominated earlier landscapes. Animals weighing roughly 10 to 100 kilograms carried enough stored energy to withstand difficult seasons while remaining efficient enough to survive on reduced food supplies. Enormous herbivores required extraordinary quantities of vegetation every day, and shrinking forests could no longer satisfy those demands. Their immense bodies, once symbols of ecological success, gradually became expensive burdens as dependable browse disappeared from one region after another. The second pattern appears in the teeth. Species possessing taller, crowned, more intricate molars consistently outlasted relatives equipped only for soft forest vegetation. Higher crowned teeth tolerated greater wear while processing tougher stems, harder seeds, and increasingly fibrous plants. Low crowned browsers had evolved with remarkable precision for a world rich in tender leaves, yet the developing Oligocene offered different meals. The ability to consume unfamiliar vegetation became one of the most dependable predictors of persistence. In many lineages, the future belonged less to the strongest jaw than to the most versatile one. No lineage illustrates this principle more clearly than the horses. The small Hyracotherium of the Eocene gradually gave rise to Mesohippus after the environmental transition. Mesohippus stood slightly larger than its predecessor, carried 3 functional toes instead of 4, and possessed more advanced teeth capable of enduring a broader range of foods. None of these changes appeared dramatic in isolation. They accumulated through countless generations before the climate reached its turning point. By the time forests withdrew and open habitats expanded, the lineage already possessed the anatomical tools required for survival. The later success of horses across grasslands began with these modest adjustments long before grasslands themselves became widespread. The entelodonts present another revealing example. Their appearance suggested brute force above all else, yet appearance alone explains little about their endurance. Although they reached impressive sizes and possessed relatively small brains compared with their bodies, they fed opportunistically. Plant matter, carrion, hard fruits, roots, and fresh meat could all contribute to their diet. That flexibility reduced dependence upon any single resource. While highly specialized browsers declined with the forests that sustained them, these formidable omnivores continued finding nourishment across changing landscapes. Their persistence demonstrates that dietary breadth could outweigh even the disadvantages associated with large size. Viewed together, these survivors reveal that natural selection preserved adaptability more consistently than perfection. Lineages able to exploit several foods, tolerate changing habitats, and function with moderate energetic demands crossed the boundary into the Oligocene more successfully than organisms exquisitely refined for one disappearing environment. The Great Break, therefore, marks more than the conclusion of the Eocene. It records a lasting principle written across stone, showing that life's greatest advantage during profound planetary change often belongs to those prepared, almost by chance, for conditions that have not yet arrived. A difference so small that it could rest across the width of a fingertip helped determine which lineage of predators would inherit the continents after the Eocene faded. Bones preserved across millions of years reveal that the decisive feature was neither towering stature nor exceptional speed. It rested in the arrangement of the cutting teeth, where tiny changes in leverage and efficiency accumulated across countless generations until they shaped the future of nearly every meat-eating mammal alive today. The creodonts had ruled for much of the Eocene, occupying hunting roles from dense forests to broad floodplains. Their jaws carried several pairs of carnassial teeth positioned toward the rear of the mouth. These shearing blades sliced flesh effectively, yet they reached peak performance only after the jaws opened widely enough for the cutting surfaces to meet. That arrangement reduced mechanical advantage during the initial bite. More muscle force was required before the teeth achieved their greatest cutting efficiency, and the design divided effort across several shearing regions instead of concentrating it within a single, optimized location. Another lineage shared the same landscapes while attracting far less attention. The Miacids were generally smaller predators, adaptable hunters and scavengers that rarely displaced the dominant creodonts during the height of the Eocene. Their mouths followed a different architectural plan. A single carnassial pair sat farther forward along the jaw, where leverage from the jaw muscles was greater. Behind those blades remained crushing molars devoted to breaking harder material. Cutting and crushing, therefore, occupied separate working zones, allowing each function to operate with greater precision. The improvement measured only millimeters across the skull, yet biomechanics magnified that modest adjustment into a meaningful evolutionary advantage. For millions of years, these competing designs existed together with little sign that one would completely replace the other. The creodonts remained formidable predators because the surrounding ecosystem still supplied the large prey and stable forests that suited their specialized way of life. Miacids persisted alongside them without overturning the established order. Their success unfolded gradually through flexibility instead of dominance. As climates shifted, forests contracted, and prey communities changed, the balance between the two groups also began to change, almost imperceptibly at first. Smaller body size reduced the energy required to survive difficult seasons, while broader feeding habits allowed Miacids to exploit opportunities unavailable to highly specialized hunters. Their efficient jaws complemented those advantages by delivering effective bites across a wider range of prey. Each favorable characteristic alone might have seemed modest, yet together they formed a combination well suited to an increasingly variable world. As creodont populations diminished through the long environmental transition, the Miacids endured and gradually expanded into ecological roles that had once belonged almost entirely to their older rivals. Every modern member of the order Carnivora ultimately descends from those resilient survivors. Domestic cats, stretching beside a window, gray wolves crossing northern forests, brown bears turning over fallen logs, sea otters floating among kelp, spotted hyenas patrolling African plains, and ringtails climbing desert canyons all share ancestry with the generalized Miacids that crossed the Eocene Oligocene boundary. Their inheritance was secured without spectacular conquest. It emerged through persistence during changing conditions, guided by anatomical details almost invisible until examined with care. The Eocene therefore left behind a lasting reminder that enduring success depends upon qualities different from those that establish dominance during prosperous ages. The ground carries memories that rarely reveal themselves at first glance. Across the American West, ordinary hillsides, weathered gullies, ranch roads, and hiking trails rest upon sediments that preserve one of the richest chapters in mammalian history. What appears to be common stone often contains the remains of forests, lakes, and creatures that flourished more than 50 million years ago. Each season of erosion uncovers another fragment, allowing the Eocene world to emerge a little farther from the rock that has protected it for ages. Among the most remarkable localities are the White River Badlands of present-day South Dakota and Nebraska. Their layered cliffs preserve the Chadron Formation, recording the closing chapters of the Eocene and the earliest part of the following epoch. Here lie the last brontosaurs, early oreodonts, and many mammals that lived through the gradual ecological transformation already unfolding across the continent. The sculpted buttes and winding ravines seen today exist because wind and water have steadily removed younger sediments, exposing these older layers. New fossils appear naturally each year as fresh surfaces weather into daylight, making the landscape itself an active partner in discovery. Farther west, Wyoming preserves another extraordinary archive within the Bridger Formation. This region captures a thriving Middle Eocene community with remarkable completeness. Fossils of Uintatherium, Patriofelis, several early horse species, primates, and relatives of tapirs and rhinoceroses occur within carefully layered sediments that reveal how these animals shared the same environments across long stretches of time. During the famous rivalry known as the Bone Wars, many discoveries from the Fort Bridger Basin transformed American paleontology and expanded scientific understanding of early mammalian evolution. The Wasatch Formation of Wyoming and Utah reaches even farther into the past. These rocks preserve the opening stages of the great mammalian expansion that followed the earlier climatic upheaval. Some of the continent's earliest horses, primates, and creodonts appear here alongside many other mammals adapting to newly available ecological opportunities. The succession of fossils provides a rare opportunity to observe the beginning of communities that would later diversify across the warm Eocene continent, offering an unusually complete narrative preserved layer upon layer. Within Wyoming, Fossil Butte National Monument protects one of the finest windows into the Green River Lake system. Fish skeletons remain so complete that delicate fins, scales, and even subtle body outlines can still be recognized after more than 50 million years. These fossils have been collected for well over a century and now appear in classrooms, museums, and private collections throughout the world, making them among the most familiar ambassadors of Eocene life. The Fluorescent Formation in Colorado preserves another side of this vanished landscape. Fine volcanic ash settled across living communities, recording insects, spiders, plants, and small vertebrates with remarkable fidelity. Delicate wing veins, leaf surfaces, and tiny anatomical features survived because burial came swiftly enough to protect them before decay erased their details. Even the Appalachian Mountains retain traces of that warmer age. Fossil pollen and preserved leaves recovered from Virginia and West Virginia show that these familiar mountains once supported forests resembling those of modern Amazonia. Countless hikers now pass across ridges that conceal this forgotten chapter, while every exposed outcrop offers another reminder that the Eocene still rests beneath ordinary ground, waiting with remarkable patience for another page of its history to be uncovered. Many of the creatures that have wandered through this journey reached modern science through a story almost as extraordinary as the animals themselves. Their discovery unfolded during one of the fiercest rivalries in scientific history, when ambition, pride, and relentless determination transformed the fossil beds of the American West into contested ground. From that conflict came remarkable advances in paleontology, even as it left lasting scars on the people who created them. At the center of the struggle stood Othniel Charles Marsh of Yale and Edward Drinker Cope of Philadelphia. Both possessed exceptional scientific ability and enough personal wealth to finance expeditions across the expanding western frontier. They began their careers as colleagues, sharing enthusiasm for the growing fossil record. Friendship gradually dissolved into distrust, and distrust hardened into open hostility. Each sought to publish first, describe more species than the other, and secure a permanent place in scientific history. Their competition soon became so intense that nearly every important fossil locality turned into another arena in their personal contest. The Bridger Basin of Wyoming became one of the earliest flashpoints when remarkable fossils of Uintatherium emerged during the early 1870s. Cope described specimens under the name Loxolophodon, while Marsh introduced the name Tinoceras for fossils belonging to the same remarkable animal. As additional discoveries accumulated, paleontologists realized that these competing names referred to a single genus. Untangling the resulting taxonomic confusion required decades of careful study, with more than a dozen competing names eventually reduced to one accepted identity. The rivalry had already begun shaping scientific literature as much as the fossils themselves. Competition soon spread beyond published papers into the field. Teams employed by both men searched neighboring valleys at the same time, racing to recover bones before their rivals arrived. Information about promising discoveries was bought, traded, and occasionally concealed. Some specimens suffered damage because collectors feared another expedition might claim them first. In other cases, descriptions appeared before complete examination had taken place, allowing priority of publication to outweigh careful interpretation. The pace of discovery accelerated enormously, although accuracy sometimes struggled to keep pace with ambition. Brontosaurs became another defining chapter of this remarkable period. Marsh's expeditions recovered impressive specimens from the Badlands throughout the later 19th century, providing the first substantial descriptions of these enormous mammals. The collections eventually passed into the hands of Henry Fairfield Osborn, who devoted decades to studying the group. His monumental two-volume work, extending across 951 pages and published during the late 1920s, represented the most comprehensive treatment yet attempted. Even so, later generations continued refining classifications, relationships, and evolutionary history as additional fossils emerged from the same formations. Despite bitterness that consumed much of their professional lives, the achievements of the Bone Wars endured. Museums across the United States still rely upon collections assembled during those years. The American Museum of Natural History, The Yale Peabody Museum and the Smithsonian Institution preserve specimens gathered amid that extraordinary competition. Those fossils became the foundation upon which later researchers reconstructed the forests, rivers, lakes, and remarkable mammals of the Eocene. The rivalry damaged reputations and friendships, yet it also uncovered an entire lost world whose story continues to grow each time weather reveals another fragment of bone from ordinary ground. Knowledge does not remain fixed within stone, even when the stone has rested beneath open skies for tens of millions of years. Every generation of researchers returns to the Eocene with sharper tools, different questions, and methods that earlier paleontologists could scarcely imagine. The strange mammals, towering birds, and vanished forests continue to reveal details that once seemed forever beyond reach, reminding us that fossils preserve more than bones. They also preserve opportunities for new understanding. One of the clearest examples came from the giant bird Gastornis. For many years, it appeared in books and museum displays as a formidable predator, standing over the forest floor like a feathered hunter. That image shifted after a carbon isotope study, published during the early years of the present century, found chemical evidence pointing toward a diet dominated by plants. A creature once imagined pursuing prey became, through careful measurement, an immense browser. The reversal demonstrated how even familiar fossils can carry conclusions waiting to be reconsidered when different evidence is examined. The same chemical techniques are now transforming the study of many Eocene mammals. Stable carbon and nitrogen isotopes preserved within fossil material provide clues that teeth alone cannot always reveal. Several species, once described as strict plant eaters, now appear to have included animal matter in their diets, while some celebrated meat specialists display signatures consistent with broader feeding habits. Bone chemistry adds another layer to the story, allowing ancient ecosystems to be reconstructed with increasing precision instead of relying only upon anatomy. Although deoxyribonucleic acid does not survive from fossils this old, another source of biological information has begun opening unexpected pathways. Ancient proteins can endure far longer than genetic material under favorable conditions. The study of those preserved proteins, known as paleoproteomics, is helping researchers compare extinct mammals with their living and fossil relatives in ways that were impossible only a short time ago. Several branches of the mammal family tree have already been adjusted as these molecular clues join traditional anatomical evidence. Fresh discoveries continue to emerge even from formations explored for well over a century. During the year 2019, researchers described a previously unknown hynodont species from Eocene deposits in what is now Utah. The announcement served as another reminder that famous fossil beds still contain undescribed animals. Improved preparation methods, renewed field surveys, and careful examination of overlooked specimens continue expanding a record once thought nearly complete. Some evolutionary relationships remain active subjects of investigation. The placement of the mesonychids alongside the earliest whale relatives continues to be tested through new anatomical comparisons and increasingly sophisticated analyses. Different studies sometimes reach different conclusions, each adding another piece to the broader picture of how hoofed land mammals eventually gave rise to fully aquatic descendants. The pathway grows clearer with every important discovery, even while certain branches remain open to discussion. The Eocene therefore exists as both history and investigation. Its creatures have not changed since their lives ended, yet humanity's understanding of them continues to evolve. Every newly prepared fossil, every refined analytical technique, and every careful revision adds another sentence to a narrative still being written. Across roughly 50 million years, these remarkable animals continue offering discoveries, inviting science to look again, measure again, and understand their vanished world with ever greater clarity. Some chapters of Earth's history become more meaningful as time passes. The Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum has become one of those chapters, studied with increasing care because its record reaches beyond vanished mammals and forgotten forests. It offers one of the closest natural comparisons available for understanding a world responding to a rapid increase in atmospheric carbon. The resemblance is not perfect, yet the ancient episode provides an extraordinary reference against which the present can be measured. Evidence gathered from sediments around the world indicates that the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum released between roughly 3,000 and 7,000 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere and oceans across approximately 20,000 years. Modern industrial activity is releasing carbon at a far faster pace. If current trajectories were sustained for centuries, the cumulative total would approach the scale documented during that ancient warming event. The difference attracting the greatest scientific attention is therefore not only the amount of carbon released, but the remarkable speed at which it is now entering Earth's interconnected systems. The fossil record preserves the biological consequences with unusual clarity. Around 30 to 50% of deep sea foraminifera disappeared during the event, reflecting widespread disruption across ocean ecosystems. Mammals expanded into newly favorable regions, populations mixed across continents, and several lineages experienced measurable reductions in body size over comparatively brief evolutionary intervals. Marine habitats and terrestrial communities alike reorganized as temperatures climbed. These transformations unfolded during a carbon release occurring more gradually than the one taking place today, making the comparison especially valuable for researchers studying ecological resilience. Recovery followed a very different timetable. Geological evidence suggests that the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum persisted for roughly 200,000 years before Earth's natural carbon cycle restored a broader climatic balance. Even after temperatures moderated, ecosystems required millions of years to regain comparable stability. The rocks preserve a consistent lesson that environmental disruption can develop over intervals appearing brief in geological terms, while recovery unfolds across spans extending far beyond the lifetime of any single species. Among the most closely examined discoveries is the reduction in body size documented within early horse populations. Fossils reveal animals becoming approximately 30% smaller during the warmest interval, a pattern widely interpreted as an evolutionary response to changing environmental conditions. Similar investigations have identified comparable trends among several living birds and mammals inhabiting regions experiencing the fastest modern warming. The ancient record therefore functions as more than a historical curiosity. It provides a framework against which present biological changes can be evaluated with greater confidence. Estimates place early Eocene atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations between approximately 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million. Modern measurements remain considerably lower, standing near 422 parts per million, yet they continue to rise. The Eocene demonstrates how climate, vegetation, and animal communities functioned under substantially higher carbon dioxide concentrations, revealing which ecosystems expanded, which contracted, and which disappeared altogether. Viewed from this perspective, the close of the Eocene becomes more than the ending of a remarkable age. It shows that ecological systems possess limits, even when change unfolds across spans that appear gradual by human standards. The disappearance of dominant mammals after prolonged climatic transformation illustrates how adaptation eventually reaches its boundary. Across millions of years, the stones have preserved that message with extraordinary fidelity, allowing the distant Eocene to illuminate the living world with unexpected relevance. The great mammals and towering birds of the Eocene no longer walk beneath broad forest canopies, yet their story did not end with their disappearance. It continued through the descendants that endured changing climates and shifting landscapes. Every meadow, woodland, shoreline, and mountain valley now holds animals carrying traits first assembled during that remarkable interval. The Eocene survives not as a forgotten world sealed inside rock, but as living inheritance expressed in forms that still breathe across the planet. Among the clearest examples stands the horse lineage. The small forest dweller, known as Hyracotherium, possessed features that later generations gradually reshaped across millions of years. Each evolutionary adjustment added another layer to a design that eventually produced the long limbs, strengthened single hoof, and durable, high-crowned, grinding teeth of modern horses. Domestic horses, zebras, wild asses, and Przewalski's horses all retain that accumulated legacy. Their bodies still reflect decisions first favored within warm Eocene forests roughly 50 million years ago, long before open grasslands came to dominate many continents. The ancestry of modern meat-eating mammals reaches back through another enduring branch. Small generalized miacids occupied the same landscapes as the formidable creodonts, surviving environmental upheaval that removed their larger competitors. From those adaptable ancestors emerged every living member of the order Carnivora. Wolves inherited refined endurance, leopards developed remarkable ambush ability, bears expanded into varied ecological roles, while seals and sea lions eventually returned to the water. Their diversity began with survivors carrying a flexible anatomical foundation through a changing world. Primates also preserve an Eocene inheritance. Fossils from North America and Europe document the appearance of unmistakable early euprimates following migrations associated with the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum. Although the North American branch disappeared before the close of the epoch, related populations elsewhere continued diversifying. Grasping hands capable of precise movement, forward-facing eyes providing overlapping vision, and steadily enlarging brains all underwent important refinement within Eocene forests. Much later, one surviving branch produced the lineage leading toward humanity, carrying those foundational adaptations across immense stretches of time. The connection between land and sea becomes especially striking through the history of whales. Predatory mesonychids shared parts of their evolutionary background with relatives close to the ancestry of the earliest whales. Subsequent discoveries continue refining those relationships, yet the broader transformation remains extraordinary. Animals descended from hoofed terrestrial mammals gradually became fully aquatic giants. Whenever a humpback whale rises above the ocean surface today, it represents a lineage whose distant relatives inhabited landscapes once shared with early horses and powerful Eocene predators. Camels offer another unexpected reminder of that vanished age. Although now closely associated with deserts across Africa and Asia, their earliest ancestors appeared in North America during the Eocene as comparatively small forest animals. Descendants eventually crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Eurasia, where different climates encouraged new adaptations suited to dry environments. Their relatives remaining in North America ultimately disappeared, leaving modern camels as travelers whose deepest roots still reach back to Eocene woodlands. Viewed together, These living lineages reveal that the Eocene never truly vanished. It persists through anatomical designs, ecological strategies, and evolutionary pathways carried continuously across millions of years. The forests themselves have changed beyond recognition, while many original inhabitants faded into history. Even so, the biological framework assembled during that distant epoch continues surrounding us every day, expressed in familiar animals, whose existence remains inseparable from a world long transformed, but never entirely lost. The Eocene leaves behind an unsettling realization that grows clearer with every fossil uncovered. The living world surrounding us was never the only destination available to evolution. It is one surviving outcome among countless possibilities. Across those warm forests and broad floodplains, nature explored forms that flourished for immense spans of time before fading completely, leaving no descendants to carry their stories forward. Their disappearance did not erase their significance. It revealed how many different paths life was capable of following before circumstances chose another direction. Entire mammal groups rose into prominence, occupied landscapes across continents, and endured for millions of years. Pantodonts browsed through rich vegetation. Tylodonts combined unusual features unlike any living mammal. Taniodonts filled specialized feeding roles, and dinoceratans carried enormous bodies crowned with elaborate skull ornaments. None can be dismissed as unsuccessful. Many survived for 10 to 20 million years, far exceeding the lifespan of countless species that exist today. Their histories ended because the environment that had rewarded their adaptations gradually transformed into something different. Evolution had tested these designs thoroughly, then ceased repeating them once the conditions that sustained them disappeared. The deeper mystery becomes visible whenever appearance is compared with ancestry. Gastornis carried the imposing outline of a formidable hunter, although chemical evidence now points toward a largely plant-based diet. Patriofelis possessed the outline of a great cat while belonging to an entirely different branch of mammalian history. Mesonychids resembled wolves, although their closest evolutionary connections reached toward the lineage that ultimately produced whales. Brontosaurs recalled rhinoceroses at first glance, yet their nearer relatives belonged among horses. Similar environments repeatedly encouraged unrelated animals toward remarkably similar bodies, demonstrating that outward form often reflects ecological demands more faithfully than family relationships. This pattern exposes the practical character of natural selection. Every generation succeeds or fails within the circumstances surrounding it. There is no preparation for distant futures, only continued adjustment to present realities. Brontosaurs became increasingly effective inhabitants of the warm landscapes that shaped them. Their tremendous size and specialized feeding habits served them well while those habitats endured. Once climates cooled and vegetation shifted, the very traits that had secured their prosperity offered less flexibility. Adaptation had reached extraordinary precision, although precision alone could not guarantee persistence through a transformed world. Small changes in Earth's history might have carried life toward another destination altogether. Had the ocean gateways reorganized later, had atmospheric carbon dioxide declined more gradually, or had certain browsing mammals developed tougher teeth before growing larger bodies, familiar ecosystems could have followed strikingly different courses. Predatory creodonts might still dominate terrestrial food webs. Six-horned giants could occupy open plains where elephants now roam. Such possibilities remind us that the modern world emerged through countless intersections between geology, climate, and biology, each influencing the others across immense stretches of time. Seen through Eocene eyes, the eventual heirs of the planet would have appeared almost ordinary. Modest horse relatives stepped through forest shade without announcing the future. Small myocids hunted beneath the attention commanded by larger predators. Nothing in their appearance declared that their descendants would someday include wolves, bears, domestic cats, seals, and countless other familiar creatures. Survival favored qualities that revealed their value only after environments shifted. The Eocene endures as a record of possibilities explored, possibilities abandoned, and possibilities still living all around us, carried forward in forms that once seemed the least likely to inherit the earth. There is a particular form of humility that arrives only after the landscape itself begins to speak across immense spans of time. It is not an abstract idea carried by philosophy, nor a passing sense of perspective. It is rooted in real places that can be visited on an ordinary afternoon. The Eocene offers this experience with remarkable clarity, revealing that familiar ground has never been as ordinary as it appears. Every hillside and weathered outcrop carries memories extending far beyond the reach of written history, waiting with patient persistence beneath modern footsteps. Across the Badlands of South Dakota, layered cliffs rise in bands of gray, rust, and pale tan, their sharply carved gullies shaped by rain, wind, and freezing winters. Vegetation covers only scattered portions of the exposed formations, leaving broad expanses of rock open to the sky. Those barren slopes conceal extraordinary abundance. Brontothers, euantothers, oreodonts, and many other mammals remain entombed within sediments that erosion steadily uncovers. Every passing season removes another thin layer, revealing bones that no person deliberately excavated. The landscape continues its own work, delivering pieces of the Eocene into daylight with unhurried consistency, as though the record never truly closed. Farther west, Wyoming's Wind River Basin appears occupied by ranches, highways, grazing cattle, and fields supporting modern livelihoods. Yet the Wasatch and Bridger formations resting beneath those familiar scenes preserve one of the richest records of the opening chapters of the Eocene mammal expansion. Creek banks, road cuts, and weathered hillsides contain the remains of creatures that established entirely new ecological communities after earlier worlds had disappeared. A traveler may pass these places without noticing anything unusual, although the rocks nearby contain evidence that transformed the study of mammalian evolution. The Appalachian Mountains offer another reminder that appearances shift across geological time. Their wooded ridges stretch through Virginia and West Virginia beneath temperate forests familiar to countless hikers. During the Eocene, those same mountains supported luxuriant tropical vegetation resembling forests now found in Amazonia. Fossil pollen, preserved leaves, and fragments of ancient plants remain enclosed within the rocks, recording climates that no longer exist there. Beneath familiar trails lies evidence that the landscape once supported palms, broadleaf canopies, and ecosystems adapted to warmth extending far beyond modern expectations. Similar stories extend across much of the American West. Agricultural fields in Nebraska occupy ground where brontotheres once wandered through flourishing forests. Highways crossing Wyoming slice through sediments deposited during the Eocene. Rangelands in Utah overlie sediments left by broad freshwater lakes that supported fish, reptiles, birds, and mammals together. The distant past is woven directly into places where crops grow, vehicles travel, and communities thrive. Daily life unfolds above geological archives that remain astonishingly close to the surface. Every fossil recovered from these formations belonged to one individual living creature. A skull displayed inside a museum cabinet once enclosed a working brain, supported living muscles, and watched an Eocene sunrise from a particular valley on a particular day. The bone itself endured while everything around it changed beyond recognition. Continents shifted, climates transformed, forests disappeared, and generations beyond counting passed overhead. Even now, those remains continue resting within the earth until erosion, careful observation, or fortunate chance allows another fragment of that vanished world to emerge once again into the light. Some absences are so complete that they become almost impossible to imagine. The Eocene leaves behind many such absences, preserved as impressions in stone and scattered bones that hint at entire branches of life now erased. Looking across that vanished world reveals a form of extinction far deeper than the disappearance of a familiar species. It reveals entire histories ending together, leaving no living descendants to carry even a fragment of their inheritance into the present. Many extinctions are partial. A species disappears while its broader family continues through close relatives. Woolly mammoths no longer walk northern grasslands, yet elephants remain. The dodo has vanished, although pigeons continue representing the lineage from which it emerged. The Eocene tells another story. Dinoceratons, pantodonts, oxyanid creodonts, and several other mammalian groups reached the end of their evolutionary paths completely. No surviving cousin preserves their distinctive anatomy. No descendant carries modified versions of their adaptations into modern ecosystems. Their branch of the evolutionary tree ended altogether, leaving only fossils to demonstrate that it ever flourished. The disappearance of North American primates illustrates this unusual completeness with particular clarity. For approximately 20 million years, forms such as Notharctus, Smilodectes, and Omomes occupied forest canopies across broad regions of the continent. Generation followed generation as grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and agile bodies became refined within warm woodland habitats. Then the changing climate of the closing Eocene brought those populations to an end. Their continental lineage stopped without leaving descendants behind. Long afterward, humanity emerged unaware that primates had once lived across North America. Their forgotten existence remained concealed until rocks finally revealed the evidence. Even the richest fossil deposits preserve only fragments of those lives. Bones record structure, teeth preserve diets with remarkable fidelity. Footprints occasionally capture movement across soft ground that later hardened into stone. Beyond these traces stretches an immeasurable realm that cannot be recovered. The voices exchanged through dense vegetation have disappeared. The texture of skin, the appearance of seasonal color, familiar scents carried through warm air, and countless ordinary moments dissolved without record. Fossils provide an extraordinary archive while also reminding us how much of every living world vanishes forever. Deep time reshapes perspective in unexpected ways. The interval separating the Eocene from the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs is shorter than the span separating the Eocene from the present day. Tyrannosaurus lived closer to Brontosaurs than Brontosaurs lived to humanity. Draw Earth history across a scale large enough to show these intervals honestly, and the entirety of recorded civilization shrinks into a mark too narrow to distinguish. Familiar measures of history lose their usefulness, replaced by durations that challenge ordinary imagination. Perhaps the most enduring lesson lies within the completeness of this transformation. A continent once inhabited by six-horned giants, hoofed predators, lemur-like primates, towering flightless birds, and countless unfamiliar mammals gradually became another world without leaving those dominant forms behind. The Oligocene followed, then later ages unfolded, each building upon survivors while countless others disappeared forever. Continents remained recognizable, rivers continued carving valleys, and mountains endured, although the living communities covering them changed almost beyond recognition. The Eocene reminds us that Earth can remain the same planet while every familiar face upon it becomes someone or something entirely different. The closing of the Eocene arrived without a single defining moment. No blazing object crossed the sky. No worldwide curtain of ash settled over the land. The transformation unfolded through countless ordinary seasons, each differing only slightly from the last. Year after year, the climate drifted toward cooler conditions, and those modest changes accumulated into one of the greatest biological reorganizations in the history of the continent. Looking backward across millions of years, the ending appears swift. Living through it would have felt almost impossible to notice. As temperatures continued to fall, the frost line crept farther south. Palm forests that had flourished across Wyoming gradually yielded to woodlands where oak and maple became increasingly common. Crocodiles withdrew toward warmer waterways, bordering what is now the Gulf of Mexico. Across broad valleys, brontosaurs encountered vegetation that no longer matched the abundance their immense bodies required. Forest canopies grew thinner in many regions, reducing the connected pathways that North American primates had depended upon for countless generations. Creodont predators also entered unfamiliar landscapes as dense cover opened into country better suited to faster pursuit hunters that would later become increasingly successful. No witness marked the passing of the final Bronto there. Somewhere within the region now called the South Dakota Badlands, roughly 34 million years ago, the last representative of that remarkable lineage completed an ordinary life. Its death carried no sign announcing the disappearance of an entire order of mammals. Wind continued moving across the landscape. Rivers continued shifting sediment from one valley to another. Plants flowered, shed seeds, and returned with the following seasons. Only much later did the absence become complete, leaving fossils where living giants had once walked for nearly 20 million years. The last North American primate disappeared with equal understatement. A small tree-dwelling animal crossed branches that had supported generations stretching deep into the Eocene. Eventually, that branch of the primate family reached its conclusion. Whether its final remains rest within a fossil deposit still waiting to emerge through erosion, or whether they will never be discovered, cannot be known. Tens of millions of years passed before primates appeared again on the continent. When they returned, they came as human beings, carrying memory, language, and curiosity, descendants of relatives that had continued evolving far from the forests their distant cousins once inhabited. The Oligocene world that followed possessed a different rhythm. Cooler conditions and stronger seasonal variation reshaped landscapes that had previously supported widespread subtropical forests. Expanding open habitats encouraged mammals capable of traveling greater distances while grazing or browsing across broader terrain. The communities taking shape began resembling the foundations of ecosystems familiar today. Although life remained abundant and inventive, many combinations of animals unique to the Eocene had vanished permanently. Their ecological roles dissolved, replaced by newcomers responding to different climates and different opportunities. Viewed from the present, the ending of the Eocene resembles the fading of a long melody instead of the strike of a final note. A world filled with towering brontosaurs, six-horned dinosaurians, hoofed predators, towering flightless birds, And early primates gradually yielded to another composition written by changing temperatures and shifting continents. The forests withdrew a little farther with passing ages. The giants entered stone. Their descendants often ended with them. Earth continued turning beneath familiar stars, carrying forward a different living world while preserving the memory of the previous one beneath layers of rock that still speak across the immense passage of time. Every long journey through Earth's history eventually arrives at a place where evidence reaches its limit. Fossils can reveal the shape of a skull, the wear upon a tooth, the chemistry preserved within ancient bone, and the forests that once stretched across forgotten continents. They cannot fully explain what it meant to inhabit that vanished world. After millions of years of discovery, the Eocene still leaves one final thought resting beyond the reach of measurement. For approximately 22 million years, the Eocene flourished as a complete chapter in the history of life. Its ecosystems matured across countless generations until forests, rivers, lakes, coastlines, and floodplains supported communities of astonishing variety. Brontotheres, Dinoceratons, Creodonts, early horses, primates, giant flightless birds, and many other lineages occupied their own places with remarkable precision. They were not incomplete experiments waiting for something better. They were living creatures entirely suited to the conditions surrounding them, as fully formed as wolves, elephants, or whales are today. Their story concluded without most of its participants recognizing that anything unusual was unfolding. A brontothere browsing among familiar vegetation could not know it belonged to the closing pages of its lineage. Small primates moving through thinning branches could not recognize that their descendants would disappear from North America for tens of millions of years. Mesonychids continued searching riverbanks for prey until the last generation gave way to none at all. Extinction arrived through ordinary lives, ending one by one, each death unremarkable on its own, until an entire branch of life existed only in stone. That gradual ending leaves a reflection extending beyond paleontology. A world can be rich beyond imagination, filled with successful organisms occupying every available niche, and still remain dependent upon environmental conditions that never stay fixed forever. The Eocene forests did not lose their complexity before they disappeared. Their inhabitants did not become less adapted before climates shifted beyond the limits those adaptations could tolerate. Continuity, measured across daily experience, concealed change unfolding across immense spans of time until another world slowly emerged from the first. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson preserved within these rocks. No landscape, however familiar, exists outside Earth's continuing history. Every forest, grassland, coastline, and mountain belongs to a planet that has always been changing, sometimes rapidly, more often through gradual transitions that become visible only when viewed across millions of years. The Eocene cannot predict the future, nor can it judge the present. It offers only the record of one complete world that flourished, transformed, and eventually yielded its place to another. Imagine one final evening beneath an Eocene canopy. Moist air drifts above winding rivers. Crocodiles rest along muddy banks in what is now Wyoming. A six-horned giant crosses an open floodplain while a fox-sized horse disappears among broad leaves. A towering bird pauses beside still water. Somewhere overhead, early primates move through branches that seem destined to shelter them forever. None of those creatures sense an ending, approaching through countless ordinary seasons. From the distance of 50 million years, their world remains astonishingly alive, preserved not as a legend, but as a reminder that every living age, including our own, occupies a single passing moment within Earth's far longer story.